True scary story. Mountain Jester. My uncle Gabu served in the army. The story I want to share with you is one he told me once when I was still young. He was about 11 or 12 years old. At the time, he and his wife lived in a small house that my parents rented right behind the house. Ours. It was an emergency for a few months while they paid off debts, but I remember well that I really loved that time because my uncle was constantly playing me music, introducing me to bands and singers I didn't know. I knew. It was a period in my life that shaped many of my current tastes. And also, I remember that time because of the stories he told me. He was a man full of jokes, and among them were some of an inexplicable supernatural nature. As I said at the beginning of my story, he was a soldier, and over the years, several completely inexplicable events happened to him. But he told me the most shocking story only once, when I asked him. He could have told this story to one of my other cousins, but he chose to make it up himself. It was difficult for him to tell this story, and yet he did. This is only me, in confidence. It happened in the 80s during a mission in which he led his troops into the mountains between the Mexican states of Michoacán, Jalisco, and Guanajuato. Anyone who watches the news in Mexico knows that these states now have very dangerous areas with high crime rates, organized. But then, things were different. Not like this. And his small detachment. He was moving forward with reconnaissance work, searching for a specific lead. They had information that someone was hiding in places where no one lived anymore, where no one could live. They were moving through the mountains, in the most inhospitable part of the region, leaving half a day's journey behind. The last villages remained. Early in the morning, it was his turn to do so. The last watch. He woke to watch over the troops in the last hours of dawn. Braulio, the youngest in the group, who for some reason greatly admired him, and constantly followed him, also woke. Although it was not his turn to keep watch, he decided to go with him. Silence reigned in the room. Absolute silence reigned above. They doubted the correctness of their instructions, so they wandered somewhat carelessly, continuing on their way because they were following orders, but not so much because they believed they would find anything. But as my uncle Gabu always told me, everything happens for a reason, and I believe it. They were there for a reason, and that reason was perhaps more important than their original purpose. It was around 4, almost 5 o'clock. Still night, but not as dark and bluer. From their observation post, he and Bolo looked out at the small plateau ahead. One of them led to small paths that, after tens of kilometers, eventually led to villages. They were talking quietly, when Braulio suddenly stopped. He opened his eyes mid-sentence, stood up, and looked toward the plateau, but he was lying face down, as if he had heard something. My uncle Gabu did the same, trusting his instincts, and the boy's keen hearing. He drew his weapon and watched carefully. In the distance, the sounds of singing approached. He watched carefully. They heard him, but they could not yet see him. But someone was approaching. Someone was singing. He seemed completely indifferent, and finally they could see him emerging from the ground. He had tall branches towering over the path, leading to a plateau of short grass, where they could now observe him with complete clarity. As he described it to me, my uncle Gabu tried to hide the fact that his eyes were filling with tears. He paused for a moment, caught his breath, and then told me the following. He saw through the sight of his pistol a man walking forward, dancing, like a child's dance, but it forced him forward, and also, as if it were all part of something greater. She was dressed in a costume for a dark dance. Her clothes were very loose, and she looked plump, moss, like that which grows on stones, as if he were wearing a serape, a poncho of dull green moss, although there were several dozen of them. As soon as this stranger appeared in her field of vision, he approached her to within a few meters, bringing with him a damp, disgusting smell. It crawled up his nose. He was wearing a strange hat, and also, he describes the hat as a cowboy hat, but flattened, dirty, and with the ends curled to the side, not forward and back, as is usually the case. And there was something else. This man was wearing a mask, a medieval jester's mask, a mask that looked like old, dirty porcelain, with bruises under his eyes. When he entered the plateau, they walked a few more meters, and saw someone following them. A child followed him for several meters, moving forward in the same strange dance. First a child, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, then another, and another, and another. Moreover, 6 small figures followed him, dancing at a distance, in clothes that they could protect them from the mountain cold. My uncle Gabo, with a silent gesture, he asked Braulio to go with the necessary help to wake the others. He watched each of the children with the smallest one at the back. He advanced one by one until he reached the first, and then he turned his gaze back to the Jester. At that moment, he noticed that the Jester had already stopped and stared straight at him with a furious expression. Two things were utterly impossible. My uncle Gabo was up above, in the branches of the trees, camouflaged, and without making a sound. There was no way he could have seen it, but it was clear that he had done it. It also seemed impossible to him to see anything. There was an expression of fury on the mask he had just seen a few seconds ago, and he didn't know it. He had it. He says it might be a glitch in his memory. What he does remember, a sign of what caused all the children to scatter in different directions. The bushes, towards the ravines, back where we were returning. And he also remembers hiring a man to tell him when to look at the creature, which was now also running in that direction. Bushes. He fired. It hit him between the back and the shoulder, but the thing kept going. They ran until they were out of sight. The troops appeared in the blink of an eye, running toward the plateau, disappearing into the bushes, into the ravines, trying to reach the children who were behind them, although in fact just a few seconds ago, they had been sleeping and running after them. Although they themselves did not know why, they only wanted to keep them safe, to protect them from whatever it was. And they caught them, all except one, the youngest. There was no trace of the Jester. Although they searched for him for several hours, they gathered the boys on the plateau and sewed them blankets to protect them from the cold. They were shivering from the mountain air, this icy air. The children didn't understand what they were doing there. They had no idea how they got there. When they got there, they didn't even know what they were going for. Nothing. When asked where they were from, where they came from, they all answered that they were from different cities located several hours away from. They were separated from each other. They all remembered falling asleep the night before, without feeling anything strange, without experiencing anything strange. Everyone was crying with excitement, trying to understand why they suddenly woke up in the middle of the mountain, trapped among branches, surrounded by soldiers, in the bushes. A few minutes later, a helicopter came for them. A few hours later, the squad received orders to return. They wanted to continue the search for the man, the Jester, and the missing child, but they were assured that helicopters would be sent to them. Keep combing the area. My uncle Gabo couldn't stop thinking about it. The look, the feeling he felt when the creature turned to look at him, a look that seemed to pierce him, my chest, and my soul. I thought about that shot too, precisely, in the sense that it entered the man's back, without causing him any discomfort, or slowing him down. Not in the slightest. Despite the caliber of the weapon, he always thought of that poor child, smaller, of whom no one ever heard again. Through this experience, as well as other, more mundane but equally difficult ones, my uncle Gabo realized he didn't have what he was looking for. It was necessary for a career in the army, but it turned out not to be so difficult. What happened left a lasting mark on him, and as soon as he had the opportunity, he asked to be released from the hospital. Then he decided to find the most peaceful life for himself by becoming a merchant, with one of those stalls that are set up in markets, in street markets, that appear in a new place every day. It was different from the rest of the city, and although this profession put him in difficult situations during difficult times, it was still not easy for him. Difficult situations, like the one that forced him to live in the small house that my parents rented, he never again experienced. Horrors, nightmares, that exist out there, very close to us, or far from us. Mountains. I'm telling this story, not because I didn't want to before, but because my uncle, he passed away in October. I think about him a lot, and it seems to me that although he was very embarrassed to talk about it, he was still very shy. These events are a way to remember him, to keep his memory alive, first with me, and now with you. Thank you for listening, community. Have a good rest, and good night everyone.